Hey everyone, and welcome to the Making Room podcast, where we clear out the clutter and make more room for God to move in our lives. I'm your host, Paul Radke, and I'm excited that you joined me today because it's a pretty special episode. A good friend of mine from childhood, James Rainey, is on the show today, and he's going to be sharing with us his story of faith. It's one that took him many unexpected places, through a whole lot of things that he didn't really want to go through, but needed to go through, and I know that it's going to inspire you today. He and his family are now pastors in Springdale, Arkansas, which was always his dream. Even as a teenager, I remember he wanted to be a pastor, but it did not happen overnight, and it did not happen without God's process. He's going to be sharing some of that process with us today, so let's jump right in, because I know you're going to enjoy it. James, awesome to have you on the show today, man. I see your story and the things that you guys have been going through, that God's been bringing you through on Facebook a lot. We don't get a lot of opportunity to talk together, but man, just the journey that I see just from social media seems like God has been with you and has been leading you and directing you in some crazy ways, like stuff that's just like off the wall, it seems like. And I just relate so hard to that right now, what me and Madison are going through and our process from leaving pastoring. And you also had to leave like traditional ministry at one point, and you've just been going like, you've been doing all the things from what I see. You're leaving traditional ministry, you're going work secular jobs, you're changing cities. Now you're going back to pastoring and more traditional forms of ministry. And man, just kind of what has that been like? What has God been doing in your life right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me, man. It's so fun to connect with you. We've been friends for a long time.
Long history.
Yeah, it's like you're my second oldest friend. Brant would be the only, because you're just a year younger than me. So
right,
but
yeah, exactly.
It's crazy stuff, man. But yeah, bro, we've been a lot of different places, a lot of parts of the journey that God has kind of led us through. So currently, right now, we've opened up a door within the last 3 months. We've been serving as lead pastor in Northwest Arkansas at Faith Assembly in Springdale. And so that was just an incredible door opened up where, lots of prayer, lots of seeking out God. Okay, where you want us to go. But that was my vision for a long time, that we were going to be pastors. And that didn't happen for a long time. And It was a lot of things where God's, okay, go do this instead, or go here instead, or just wait and kind of enter the unknown. So, we can kind of go through a lot of the discussion of how it all happened, but ultimately, what, like, looking back where I'm at right now, and granted, we're just 3 months in, but it's I even preached on this Sunday. I made a statement where I kept saying the other side is worth it. The other side is worth it. And going through a season of just not knowing, and that was probably the hardest thing for me. I want to know everything. I want to have control. Yeah. I want to know all the answers. I really don't like it when God just says, step in a direction and I'll show you where. I want to know. And when I don't know, I get very frustrated. And so going through that season, and now I can say, okay, the perspective of the other side, it's worth it. And going through that, kind of the fog is being lifted, and it's just like, wow, yeah, God, you were in every one of those situations and every one of those moments. And even then I didn't understand it at the time, you were there. And so that's been such a fun experience now with perspective. And it's, granted, before that perspective, it wasn't as fun.
Right, exactly. Perspective is everything.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So, and for, kind of the backstory of us, I listened to a couple of the first earlier podcasts you did, where you kind of talked about your story and how pastoring was never really in the cards for you in the beginning. Like, you didn't want to do that, and I remember that growing up. Where it's like,
right, I was about to say,
it's like, when is little Paul gonna preach?
Never.
And he was like, that is not me.
Yeah, we had the worship team and the Zeteo and all of that.
Yeah,
and I wouldn't even talk. Yeah. I would not even speak. Like, I'd sing, no problem. Speak? No, thank you. You ain't about to get me.
Exactly. Yeah, I remember that. But for me, that's all I wanted. Like growing up, that is everything I wanted. Was I want to pastor, I want to be in ministry, want to do these things. And so, when I left, God's house, I was in high school. We graduated, and then I moved on right away. I moved on to North Louisiana. We were in a program called Master's Commission, where went right into ministry. And like with 2 years, that internship in the church, God did some great things there, shifted a lot of perspective, a lot of ideas, in some good ways and some not good ways. But yeah. And then, right after that, 2 years went right into ministry. So I was 20 years old and I was a full-time youth pastor, and, I was still going to Bible college on, during distance ed. And so it's weird because like when you get to a place where, I was a younger guy, it's like, this is all I want to do is I want to pastor. And then I'm still a younger guy thinking I'm an older guy at 20. We both know that's still young, but
we were so smart at 20.
Oh yeah, I knew everything. And it's like, it's 20. It's like, well, I'm in it. Like I'm doing it. Like I've did what I wanted to do. Like now what? And it was, we pastored and youth pastored for 7 years in 2 different churches, one in Shreveport, one in Lake Charles, Louisiana, and was great, awesome experiences. We came to a point where I felt like God saying, the season's done. And I didn't really know what that meant. Like I just said, all right, well, I'm assuming that if the season of youth pastoring is done, the next season would be pastoring, because that's what we always saw.
Right.
It was
get the promotion.
Yeah. You go to the big church,
Right.
Like, so that was my assumption. And it's like, okay, well, I started applying to churches to pastor. And as 27 at the time. And I was still wanting to, stay in Louisiana, still live there. And, we interviewed a few places. Nothing really felt right. And I just kept hearing God say, just your season of youth ministry is over and step into the unknown. And that was scary. It was really scary. That's all I've ever known is church ministry, church life. I've never had my real job. I worked, when I was last real job I had, I was like 16, so I never had a real job. And so it's like, I don't know what to do. I'm getting ready to be, I went to tell my pastor at the time and says, I don't know what this means, where we're going, but I know I'm not doing this church a service by staying here, and I need to step out. And I didn't know what that meant. And, he was gracious to kind of give us wisdom and really let us leave well. And we did.
Yeah.
We made good relationships there. And we went into this season of a few months of just kind of like, okay, God, what's next? And that's where good friends of ours opened up a situation where we can go and plant a church with them in Phoenix. Mm-hmm. And we decided to go. We went to Phoenix for 7 years, and that was a total change in ministry, because we went from very structured vocational, my salary is in ministry, to now I'm no longer getting paid for ministry because we're just starting something new, and I had to find a job. And so I landed several odd jobs at first. Eventually got a job doing like logistics and truckload and transportation logistics. They like sales and brokering, and kind of stayed in that world a good bit. While the church was planted, we were there for 7 years in Phoenix, and God did some great things. My biggest thing was that I still thought that God was saying, step into the unknown. And even though the Phoenix was known, even though like that was an actual calling, so it could go here and do this, part of me was always thinking about, okay, God, well, what's next? Because surely
after Phoenix,
after like what's next after? Because surely you're not gonna like I'm in youth ministry. I've developed these relationships, and I've kind of made inroads with people. It's like surely another door is going to open up where I can get back into vocational ministry and have a salary from a church and all these things. And, I kind of glorified in my own head the idea of coming back to Louisiana and pastoring. Like that was all, even when I was in Phoenix, even when I was seeing God do great things. And it was like, well, that's great, but eventually I'm coming back to Louisiana and pastoring a church.
That's just where your head was at. Like your heart was still Louisiana. Yeah.
I glorified it to a level where that was like almost like God, it was like that. I worshiped this idea that this is where God was going to take me. Even though he didn't speak that, I was just thinking that this was going to happen.
Yeah. It's so true. We do this all the time. At least I do. I assume other people do it. Is that we hear God say something and then we interpret it in the way we want to interpret it, not in the way he said it.
Absolutely.
And I find that the more he speaks now, the more I try and like take the limits off. Like, okay, this is what I would think it means, but since you're telling me, I'm going to assume that's not what it means.
Yes.
Because if I can come up with it and you're saying to go out into the unknown, then it can't be the unknown if I'm coming up with it. Right.
Yeah.
So I've got to, if I'm going to go do, I'm giving a thumbs up. I don't know how.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Yeah. So if I have the idea of God's telling me go into the unknown, but then I've got all the solutions to what the unknown looks like, then why would God tell me go into something that I've already got an idea for?
Yep. Absolutely.
And so I find that God is very good about being patient and kind with us in those moments and gently guiding us along to what he has.
So true. Yeah. I mean, it was a lot of patience with me. And once again, kind of that idea, going back to like perspective, is, I look back on the time of Phoenix that we had there. And even though my headspace was always like, okay, God, what's next? What's next? What's next? I look back, and even though I wasn't employed, technically employed by a church, I felt like I did more ministry in that season than ever before. Because like, I remember I worked at a place, and then I was surrounded by the world. And then, we had born up in church, we know what that means. Like the world is around you. Like we're always around. It's just, there's a bunch of non-saved people and that was like, right. Exactly. And for me, I didn't have a whole lot of experience with that. Quite honestly, like I was ministering to people, but my mindset was always like church world. And I had so little interaction with things outside of church until I worked at a job. And it would be like almost every day, because it was a job where, it was a busy job, but it was not like we're not like manufacturing or work. It was a lot of phone calls. It's a white collar job, like brokering, truckload logistics. And so a lot of downtime where you can, would hear people's prayer request, and people come up and say, hey, can you pray for me for this? And, and we're like ministering to people in a secular setting that had no clue about God, but they knew I was a pastor. They knew I had all these kind of things, carried myself this way. And so, the ministry to the people who were not saved and not in church was amazing. And I didn't realize it until after I got out of it. It was like, oh, that's ministry too.
Yeah.
It's crazy when we think it was like, oh, that's also ministry. You don't have to be paid by a church to have the pastor title. And that was that was the biggest lesson probably that I known. And I wish I would have known it sooner. I wish I would have got it sooner. But thankfully I didn't, miss all that opportunity, but it was something that because of my headspace, and I was just saying, hey, God, I don't know. Like I was making up excuses after excuse of why I didn't want this to be the thing. And I was like, no, you're in it. You're in the season. Enjoy the season. And, but yeah,
do you feel like all that, I don't know. Do you feel like you did know, like God was telling you, but you just didn't want to hear it?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's absolutely true. Because
I had that too when God told me to leave God's house. I was like, I don't know. I did know he was telling me to do it, but I was like,
Yeah.
I just could not. It would not process.
Yeah. Just start walking.
Yeah.
What was like, so many things that was like keep going into me, and it's like, well, why not? Why not just do this? Why not? Why is this not enough? But yeah. So the other side of it, like coming out of Phoenix, so the kind of the story goes, we the pastors that we moved to Phoenix with to help like launch the church with, they're good friends of ours. They were in a season of transition themselves. This was right before COVID hit, 2018, 2019, where they were transitioning out of pastoring.
Mhm.
And then we were kind of like, okay, well, we moved here kind of for them. The next pastor, we were good friends with the pastor still, but we told them right away, it's like, hey, we're going to be here for a year. We're going to be here during the transition while you kind of help you kind of transition. And then we know that we're kind of going to step out, and don't really know what yet, but we were going to step out. And so that's what we did. And we had kind of within that kind of year, a door opened up in Louisiana for us to come back to Louisiana. And it was like, first thing was like, oh, check mark. That was something I've talked to God about, and then the second thing was come back to Louisiana and plant a church, that had shut down.
Mm-hmm.
So we had basically talked to a lot of people and made the decision, yes, okay, we're going to do this. We told everyone that we're going to do this. We told our pastor we were doing this. And then literally like maybe 2 weeks after that, that's when the world shut down with COVID. And so
Fun.
it's like everything changed in church world with COVID.
Yeah.
But like me, it's like, hey, we told them yes, we're told them we're coming, COVID or not, we're doing this.
Right.
So we eventually had, left Phoenix, moved back to Louisiana. This was been about June or July of 2020. And the city we were coming back to was Lake Charles. And there was a great opportunity, had a building. So church had just shut down, and we were going to restart a church. Well, we get there, and 3 weeks later, Hurricane Laura just destroys the city, destroys Lake Charles, Category 5 hurricane, messed up the church, not totally devastated the church, but messed it up. Our house was fine. We rented, but I mean, I work remote, so my job was able to work remote. But now we're without internet. So can't really do a remote job without internet.
Kind of hard to be remote.
That's impossible. Yeah. So eventually, the more I was, after took weeks and weeks and weeks to get the city back up, and I think we were out without internet for like 3 months, something like this, silly like that. It was crazy.
That's so crazy.
Yeah, it was like crazy internet. So I lost that job. Needless to say, it's mostly had to do with sales, and it's like, well, I can't do that if I don't have internet, I don't have electricity.
Right.
Now I was able to come back and live with my parents and evacuate, from there, but that's only sustainable for so long. But well, anyway, when that hurricane happened, though, we were still just like in my mind, because once again, I had kind of like the idea was, oh, Louisiana, I'm going to go back to Louisiana, I'm going to do this. And it was never just like, yes, this is the will of God. It was just God. I felt like God saying, okay, you can do it if you want to. If you want to do this, do it. Almost like, okay, fine. You've prayed enough about this. You've talked enough about it. Go and do it. See what happens.
Right. See how it works out.
It didn't work out. And so, but yeah.
So what is your thought process? Like you're planning to move, COVID hits, you go ahead and do it anyway. Then hurricane hits right after that.
Yeah.
What are your prayers like at this point? Like,
are you
like, God, I screwed it up? Or are you like, God, you have me here for a reason? Where are you at?
I internalized it more than I blamed God. It was much more of that. It was very little of God, what are you doing? It was more of how did I miss this?
Yeah.
And that was my thought, was like, oh, I must have, because I must have missed God. Like, there's no way we did this because I was wrong, didn't hear from God, blah, blah, blah. And there's no way God would call me into this season like this.
Right.
And that was my thought process. But once again, with perspective, after we moved, I kind of realized that not we as a family, I think my wife knew right away. She said, no, this is not going to work. But
Yeah, wives are like that.
Mine's
like
know.
that too.
Yeah. she knew. Like, she just knew.
It's just annoying. Let's be
Yeah,
honest.
I go, man, you really hear it from God.
Right.
And so she knew before I did, but it was more of, we needed to go through that in Louisiana to realize that, number one, we were probably not best suited to church plant. Doesn't mean ever. Doesn't mean that's never going to happen. But knowing the type of leader I am, the pastor I am, I'm much more geared to restore and bring restoration to an existing church and start a new church. I'm just not that entrepreneurial. I'm just not. Mm-hmm. And so kind of that realized that, number one. And then number two, I realized that, honestly, and it's not to knock, we have all, this, all my family lives there. I love New Orleans. We love Louisiana, but we just knew right then and there after the hurricane, after being there for a little bit, that Louisiana is great to visit as a family, but we didn't want to live there again. And it took going through that to really get that in me. And so, yes, the season was like, I don't feel like I missed it. I really don't. Looking back on it, I don't feel like we were wrong. I think we needed to go through it.
Yeah.
I needed to go through it. And it wasn't to the point where we didn't even really get started. So it wasn't like we let anyone down. We didn't like move with families and things like that. Like, it was just us. Like, at that point, literally just got there, and that happened. And then we were still going to do it. And then weeks go by and another hurricane hits. And then it was that point where it's like, I remember Rebecca saying, do you really want to do this?
Yeah.
And at that point I really said, you know what? No, I don't. And
sounds like Jonah, man.
Yeah.
Sounds like you need to be thrown out into the water.
Yeah.
Lake Charles is getting hit too hard. You got to get out of there.
It's like, once James leaves, then we're going to get no more hurricanes.
Right.
Sorry, city of Lake Charles. It surely felt that way. It really did. But then, kind of like, okay, well, I know we're not doing that. I thought we went from the, not doing, kind of weirder ministry, kind of church, not weird, but I mean, church planning style. Now we're going to back into real ministry and vocational ministry. And then it's like, that didn't happen. And then now what? So it was, I got another job, really a good job with a remote company where I'm still doing now. Doors are continually opening in that world, where that's been really, really good, healthy job for me. And then I was like, okay, well, I'm good just doing this. We actually decided to move to Springfield, Missouri, to be close to the people, the family that we launched the church with in Phoenix.
Okay.
That's where they moved.
Okay. Gotcha.
Our families became super, super close. Like, their kids are the same age as our kids. So there's like an extension of family, so. Was
that like God's telling you go to Springfield, or was that like, I think we're going to move here and God just supported that idea?
This is the latter. Yeah. It was never the feeling of, yes, God, we're just going to Springfield. It was never that. It was literally just like, we'll figure out the next thing. Once we get there.
And I'm just listening to this story, and I'm thinking, that time in Lake Charles, what a gift.
It is.
You learned so much about all the things you thought you wanted. Yep. You discovered a lot about you, which is invaluable. You discovered a lot about your family and what y'all want as a unit. And that's like, just, you can't pay for that,
No. And you really looking back on it to think about it, we learned that without having to hurt anyone. Yeah. And what I mean by that is we learned it without having to actually start the church.
Right. And then close it or
move there. And then we realize, oh crap, no, we can't do this.
Yeah.
So it was that was, I thank God for that. I really do. But even though it was hard, it was very hard to go through it. And, but I do thank God for that allowed us to have that, break that mentality, and then still go back to another season of, all right, just wait and wait for the next thing. And that's what Springfield was for us. We waited, and there was a lot of prayers to God at that point where it was like, I really don't know. I don't know why we're not being, called upon. I put out resumes to a lot of churches.
Yeah.
I mean, not a single one. Like churches that were, some churches maybe like, 20, 25 people that was like, who else is applying here? Like,
right.
I really wonder that. It's like, am I the only resume that you rejected?
Right. No, not this guy.
Yeah. It's like, we're good not having a pastor for years. We don't want James. And so, man, so much as I was like, God, what are you doing? I mean, like, I loved my job. I loved what I did. Family was healthy. Kids were healthy. We got out of that experience. They were making good friends. We're in a good community, and our family was getting so much stronger. And I was still at the same time saying, God, I'm happy, but I know you have a calling on my life. And I felt like I can go one or two ways. Like I felt like I really could, where I could just say, I'm okay not doing that calling and just being happy and saying, you know what, I tried, and I'm just gonna do, be a training manager for a software company, and be here in Springfield. I volunteer in a good church, just enjoy life. That was one path. The other path was saying, you know what, I am called, and I still enjoy this, but I'm called, and I want to go forward. And that I chose kind of the second path. Mm-hmm. And because I knew long term that even though I said I was happy, I would not stay happy if I couldn't do what I really wanted to do. So fast forward a bit, applied to several churches, everything turned me down. I had basically just I applied to this church in Arkansas where we're at now, and really and I prayed about it like everyone, but just all right, send the resume off. Not even a second thought. Didn't even tell Rebecca. Didn't even tell my wife about it.
Surprise, babe.
Yeah, and she was always like, you can apply, but we're not going anywhere. Which is kind of like
send your resume wherever you like, but I'm happy here.
Yeah. And so so we had I remember I was at our friend's house we moved to Springfield with. We were at their house. I got a text message. It's like, hey, I got your resume. We'd love to meet with you tomorrow. And it was been months that I sent it off. So I almost forgotten about it, honestly. And then I told Rebecca, hey, I applied to this church in Arkansas. They want to have a phone interview tomorrow. And she didn't tell me anything later, after we accepted. She told me right. It was the moment you told me that, I knew we were going to Arkansas. It was I didn't know who the church was. I didn't know anything else. I just knew that we were doing this and that God was in it and that I was going to be all right. And she didn't tell me that at the time. And, I had the conversation, interviewed the people. They moved and we interviewed in Arkansas a few months later. And, they wanted us. They moved very, very quickly. And they wanted us. And so that was something that, I had asked God that, I wanted a church that was an existing church that had a good history, that was relatively small. I didn't want a big church. We were a relatively small church that was okay for me being bivocational. They were okay with that.
Yeah.
And then also a church that really wanted to change. And, as you probably know, you've been in church world enough, there's not a lot of those churches, quite honest.
Yeah.
A lot of churches that are open are probably looking for their previous pastor who looks and feels just like their previous pastor does.
Right, exactly. They just want to keep repeating what they've always had.
And most of the times that previous pastor was, a lot older than me.
Right.
So that's kind of what they were looking for. And so I had kind of almost given up hope. And, for this to happen, for God to open a door that was just like everything I prayed for, everything we wanted. We wanted to have a city that was, a really cool city that we can, a lot of hiking and biking in, a lot of great landscape. And there is beautiful out here. We're in Northwest Arkansas, surrounded by like hills and mountains. It's beautiful. Lots of biking trails, big city. I didn't want to go to a small country place. We wanted a bigger city around us. So we're right near Fayetteville, Springdale, Rogers, kind of all within that same area. So about 500,000 people live here. So it just checks all the boxes. And then once we got here, it was just like the outpouring of love to our family. It's been so confirmation after confirmation that, this is exactly where God has us.
Yeah.
And even though, and now I'm kind of looking at this now and saying, learning the lessons of, not trying to hijack the current season by saying, oh, what's next? Is there's a lot that we are going to change here at this church. There's a lot of, the look of things, the feel of things. Over time, we want things to look a lot different than it is right now.
Mm-hmm.
But, and I even told this to the church the other day, is that I, as a pastor, I never wanted to come to a place where I don't enjoy the current season we're in. That I enjoy the season we're in. And that's something that's a lesson that I had to learn through this journey of going through the unknowns and going to Lake Charles and going to Phoenix and all these things. We learn those things by, if I was only looking for what's next, I hijacked the current season. I shortchanged the current season. And
I'm guilty of that as well.
Every one of us are, man. And it's so easy to be.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of where we're at, man. I'm just excited. Like I said, the other side is worth it. And that's kind of, I preached that to the church on Sunday. I was really preaching it to myself.
Right.
That's
how it goes.
Always.
Those are the best messages.
Always.
Right.
Always. Yeah. Like I was able to I finished usually most times the messages 12 days, but that one was just got it all out in one day. It was this is more me. I needed this message from me.
Right.
But it is the other side is worth it. So yeah, I mean, the seasons are tough, man. And it's never easy.
Yeah.
But it's worth it. It's always worth it. But yeah.
Yeah. There's a saying that I've held on to for a long time is Jesus comes to comfort the afflicted, but to afflict the comfortable. And he likes to keep us in that place of tension, I think, where I'm got my comforts, but then I'm not so comfortable that I'm not progressing and moving forward. And I'm not progressing and moving forward so much that I don't take the time to lean back and just be comfortable with where I'm at right now. And that's definitely that whole process of us leaving God's house. You heard the story from, it was kind of few years of a thing, is God was telling me to go, but then there was also this part of me that was like, but right now we're supposed to stay.
Yeah.
God said go, and I'm like, all right. But then there was still the part that's like, no, not quite yet. You heard me, but there's a timing to this. And that whole time I wasted being content, being so focused on what was next. I had it made. Everything was great. There was nothing wrong. Everything was good. Life was great. Yeah. And I didn't enjoy it one bit because God told me to go. And I was like, all right, now. And so I've just really learned when God says something, he's with you through it.
Yep.
He's not telling you and then, all right, that's it. Just go do it. But he's with you every step of the way. Difficult times, good times, just be patient and allow God to have his way and his timing. Jesus showed up, but it took a while before he actually went to the cross. And then it took 3 days before he was resurrected. There's a timing to this thing. It doesn't just happen in an instant, the way we want it to happen.
Oh, absolutely, man. Yeah. And one thing too, just to add on to that, just a question for you is, when you're going through that next season, and this is something that I had to learn kind of the hard way, or not learn the hard way. I feel like I failed in, honestly,
Yeah.
is that um, I didn't really do a great job of maintaining relationships with
Hmm.
people that were still in the current season that I was trying to get out of.
Yeah.
And so I, part of me is like, I don't even know some of the answers of this question too, but like, how have you done, that kind of maintaining relationships with people that, hey, I'm here now. I'm not here anymore. You're here still. I'm here now. Not that I'm better than, but
Right.
I'm just in a different area, different place, different season. How have you maintained relationships with those?
Yeah. It's been difficult at times
Yeah.
and a little complicated, especially leaving a church and then staying in the area.
Yeah.
That can be perceived bad.
Yes.
And, I've really done my best. Just there's people that I know I had like a spiritual connection to.
Yeah.
Like there was just, I know God had placed this together. We both grew from one another through the seasons of life we were in. And so I really try to maintain those relationships. And then there's kind of another level where people reach out. And this is just because when you're pastoring, like you just get connected to a lot of people on different levels. So
Yeah.
there's another level of people that just reach out and just appreciated me and my voice, and I just do my best to be there for them. But I know that's the
Yeah.
extent of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there's only so deep you can go with everybody,
Right.
and then it's those rare ones that you can just like bare your soul to, and they don't judge you for it. Which God bless those people because they're hard to find.
Absolutely, man. Yeah. I mean, I look at it for me where, I really noticed this a lot as I grew up, but like West Bank or God's house, when I first left, and you probably know this, but I mean, like I changed a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and um, in that I was, and my mentality was like, well, I'm in a different place now, and in almost in a prideful way, whereas
Yeah.
like I lost connection with a lot of friends. I mean, people that we've grown up together with. I mean, we lost connection over the
Yeah.
years in so many ways. And a lot of that was me saying, well, I know God's brought me here. And I almost looked down on the ones who were still over there.
Yeah.
And that was such a hard thing for me, a stupid thing for me
Yeah.
to go through. And I'm only saying this because, people are listening, to this and talking through like seasons and going through things, but is that the relationships in every place, you don't want to burn bridges.
Yeah.
And I wish I would not. And I don't think I've burned bridges forever. I don't think I have. Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone out there hates me.
Guess takes two for a relationship, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's like that Seinfeld quote. It's like, how can anybody not like you? That's
Right.
that's how I feel sometimes. But but still, like there's people that I wish I would have stayed closer to, and
Yeah.
I didn't do a good job through the seasons, through changing seasons, of staying close to relationships, and because that's so key. It's
Yeah. Well, I was blessed. So I'd say I grew up with a burning bridge mentality more like I'm going to set this thing on fire before anybody else does. And then God blessed me with a season in life where I did a lot of stupid things, uh, said a lot of dumb things, did a lot of dumb things, just completely running off in my own direction. And that season of life, honestly, probably made me who I am today because it gave me such a better perspective on life, to be honest. Like I just grew up in my own little bubble, and I didn't realize the way that bubble was perceived outside of it. You know what I'm saying? Like
yeah,
I just had my own little world, and I thought that was like the only reality. Like this is what it's like for everybody. And then that season of life like took me outside of it, and I was like, oh, that's not what it's like for everybody at all.
yeah,
And there's like so many different journeys and experiences and mindsets, and so that was just it was. I can't call it a good time in life because I did a lot of stuff I shouldn't have been doing. But at the same time, without that time in life, God could not be using me the way he
No.
is now,
Yeah.
just because it gave me such a perspective.
Absolutely. You know, and I think about this a lot with my kids too, is that, you know, I love the idea of growing up in church, staying at the church, at that one church, and never leaving that one church forever.
Right.
Like, that sounds awesome. It really does. But when I think about it from my own journey, was that I know I would not be the person, be the man I am today if I didn't leave at some point.
Yeah. Right.
And so, like, it's like one of those things where I think about with my kids now. My oldest son is 15, and I mean, there'll be a time where he's gonna graduate high school, and what does he do? Like, where does he go? Does he leave and go to a different church? And like, so much part of me is like, well, I hope he doesn't, but also is like, I hope he does. Like,
Right.
because there's so much to grow when you just step out. And
Yeah.
that's not to say you can't learn from staying in. You can't. It's not to say that. But that if
you can learn, but there's some things you can't.
Yeah,
there's some things that you just can't.
Strategic at
Right.
knowing how to advance and get out of your bubble. But if you're not, then you need to leave.
It's like reading about something versus experiencing that something. Like,
so true.
It's just completely different. Like, you can have all the book knowledge you want, but until you're actually doing it, read all the books you want about parenting, but until you're a parent, it's trash, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But no, man, it's yeah.
So I mean, I'd say getting outside, not just getting outside, like, pushing them outside the nest in some regard, I think is like a healthy thing.
Yeah.
Because I've seen people stay in the same bubble for too long. And it really does affect, like, if they have a calling or called to ministry or whatever, it really affects that in a big way, because your audience is so limited, because your perspective is so limited.
Yep.
And when you get that new perspective, you're able to reach a whole new group of people. And this is the first time when I left pastoring that I really left, like, the church. Like, even while I was running from God, I'm still around. It's still a big part of my life, culturally. Right. This time, the moment I left, it's like somebody kicked lights on in a room that I'd never seen before. And I was like, oh my God, like, so many things that I had thought I knew. Like, when this light was kicked on, I was like, oh, wow, I didn't know jack. Like, wow. So it's really been such a beautiful time, as difficult as it's been at times. Like, there's just lots of uncertainty.
Sure.
There's lots of processing, like when you leave, someplace you never thought you would go, you never thought you'd leave from, and now you're being kicked out the nest. Like, it's kind of a painful experience. But at the same time, like, I've learned so much. I'm continuing to learn so much, and whatever God is preparing me for, I am, like, accepting that. All right, I'm in preparation, and that's not as fun as getting to the point you want to be at. Right? It's like not as fun as the goal, but I'm learning how to enjoy the journey more, which was definitely something that I was not very good at.
That's so good, man. I'm so happy for you, Paul, because I mean, just knowing that when I see, other friends that take a step out in faith, and you just know that, all right, what's going to happen? Maybe in a month, maybe a year, maybe 2 years, whatever that is.
Right.
There's a season of preparation. There's a season of isolation sometimes where it's so necessary and so needed for that next season of exposure. And there's a great book I read, if anyone listening that kind of through these times, called Anonymous by Alicia Chol. That book helped me so many ways, because, it was embracing the idea that it's okay to have hidden seasons, that it's okay to not be known. It's okay for someone to say, hey, what happened to James? I know he was this, and what is he doing now? That it's okay, because it's not about the platforms and the stages. It's about the amount of preparation, and it really dives into that whole iceberg kind of concept where, 98% of the iceberg lives underwater, 2% sticking out, or whatever the percentages are. And she did the whole thing with Jesus' life, where only 10% of his life is really displayed publicly, and so why do we always want the platforms and stages and never approach the seasons of anonymity? And so it's hard, it's stressful. There's a lot of question marks. There's a lot of financial question marks involved in that too. We've walked through that so many times, financially, where it's like, I don't know what's going to happen, God. But being able and faithfully approaching that season of anonymity, it seems to be such a biblical concept, and that season because you that go through preparation, and it sets yourself up for the next stage. And so I'm excited for you, man. I'm so excited.
Thank you.
Because I know what's going to happen, and what's happening now is fantastic. And whatever that next thing is, it's even more fantastic because it's a season of preparation. And so I love it. I've always loved this stuff.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. And excited for you guys too. Just the journey that you've been on, to me, is just it's just remarkable. Because, leaving a church is one thing. Leaving cities is like a whole other thing in pursuit of things. So just to take those steps out and just like move the whole family and trust God through that is awesome to me. I just admire that quality so much.
One story of faith. I know we're getting over here, but about the journeying stuff is when we moved to Phoenix, we were younger too, but we had zero plan of what would life look like after we moved. So meaning we had spent all of our money on getting there. And he was like, okay, now we're here. We need to buy groceries and literally we need to get a house. So we need to get a rental house. So we had zero money. Like we got into town and I landed a job, with a book, I was a book truck driver, where I would deliver books at, have you seen Choice Books in like Walgreens and CVS? I filled those bracks. I traveled to all over the north, southwest, the area, and filling book racks. That was my job. It was terrible, but it was a job, and it paid very little. But we got to Phoenix. We had no place to go. I got there first, and I remember telling the guy, he was my boss. There was a Mennonite organization that did this. He said, "Well, what do you guys need?" I said, "Well, we're moving. The plan is to move. We're having some delayed payments, stuff like that. We got found a place to live." He said, "Well, I've got a rental house, like a little bungalows you can stay in for a little bit." So it's little like 1-bedroom condos that we stayed in with me and our 2 kids and the wife. And so we stayed there for like 3 weeks for free. Just met the guy. He offered us a place to live for free.
Nice. Got
a little bit on our feet, still waiting on finances to kind of clear up. We were waiting on a check to come through and didn't come through. And then he just asked us, he's like, okay, well, how much money do you need to get into a rental house? How much money? And we told him, all right, we need $2,000. And he's like, okay, give me a few minutes. He came back, handed us $2,000 in cash, and just said, don't worry about paying us back until you can figure it out. Said, even if it's a month, year, it doesn't matter. Just take it. You guys are good. I trust you. Just met the guy, like literally just met him. And we did that, got into a house. And then literally like 2 weeks later, we found out that that person ended up moving to Pennsylvania. So he was just like, we got a forwarding address and we paid him back the money, but it was never just this, hey, when are you going to pay that back? When are you going to pay that back? It was, he meant it. Like he gave us this money. He moved away, and it was like, we would not have survived if it wasn't for him. And so we didn't have the plan. We didn't know the steps. We didn't have it all figured out. We had nothing figured out, but God still provided. And in the most random ways. And it's time, those situations like that, time and time again has happened for us. And it's scary, but man, God has been faithful. Like just it's crazy. God has been faithful.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Man, I could keep this discussion going forever because I just got like all these new files came up of what we could talk about. But so hopefully there's somebody watching that is heard the voice of God and they're debating what they're going to do, like which way they're going to go with this.
Yeah.
And what would be your one encouragement toward them, but also your biggest advice to them in this next season of their life?
So I think the biggest encouragement would be, just the simplistic way to say it, but go for it. Like I know it sounds hard and sketchy and scary, but go for it. And when we first did this move, I remember that song Oceans was really, really popular. And that became like an anthem for me. Like take me to the place where my trust is without borders. And so what I've always my prayer in that time was, and still today is, God, I want to make sure that I know I want you and your blessing and your hand on my life to be without borders. And so I need to have my trust level be without borders. And I'm not going to trust you up to a certain point. I'm just going to trust you. And so just wildly trust and wildly obey. And when we do that, God's going to take care of it. And I know that sounds like, pie in the sky thinking, but just does. Like it just does.
Right.
Like I just does it.
Right.
And then so that would be the encouragement, and the biggest like advice is, I would say when you're in that season, because I'm believing that you're gonna go, believing that you're in it, is you will have so many moments of doubt and so many moments where you said, this is stupid, this is stupid, this is stupid. And don't discredit yourself. Don't discredit your ability to hear God's voice. Stay dependent on God's voice and know that He has called you. And even if you don't have the next answer right away, that just trust. And I always go back to the story of Abraham and Sarah, and God speaking to Abraham and saying, I'm going to make you a great nation, going to do these things. And, you just got to go and do this. And then Abraham went years of his life without ever hearing from God again.
Right.
And I was like, that sucks. Like that,
right.
I don't want that. But he went years without ever hearing from God again. And yet he kept his trust. And then eventually he saw that promise come to fruition. And so just know that God's going to take care of you. It's not going to always be in your timeline. Just trust in God. Keep your focus on what God has spoken to you and wildly obey. Just encouragement. You obey and God's going to take care of it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so good. And I would add to that, this is encouraging me as well as other people, but when God made a promise to Abraham, it wasn't contingent on Abraham.
Yeah.
He swore an oath to himself that he would bless him and multiply him.
Yep.
And so the promise that God gives us is contingent on his ability to fulfill that word. And, like you were saying, you were beating yourself up at times. I've certainly done the same. And when things go wrong and failures happen, that's immediately what we want to do. But God has a way of turning those failures and those things that we think are so terrible into the most beautiful parts of who we are.
Yep.
And so thank you so much for being on the show with me and for sharing some of your story. We're definitely going to do this again.
Yeah.
And I know you're coming to town in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe we'll get to do it in person or we'll just hang out and do it remotely again. But I so appreciate your time and many blessings on you guys as y'all enter into this new endeavor. I know God is going to use it to do some incredible things.
Thank you so much, man. I appreciate your time today too, Rod.
Thank you so much for joining me today on this episode. Hey, do me a favor. If you enjoyed it and if you found it valuable to your life, share it with a friend or a family member. It would really mean the world to me and it would help this audience to grow. I so appreciate all of you and I look forward to being with you again next week as we continue making room.